But it goes beyond Jim Crow's. I'm actually going to the Constitution, because here's the thing that people don't get when we talk about the Constitution and inalienable rights. You were saying that men were created equal at a time when black men and women were property. So how does that actually work out? So we have to really be honest. A lot of people do make it
worked out just
Jim
fine
Crow.
for the people it was supposed to work out for.
And a lot of people talk about it as just Jim Crow. I don't just deal with Jim Crow. I deal with the entire range of U.S. law, which was built to benefit certain people from the onset till today. So when you have that behind you and you have that history and you have the complexion for the protection, right? For you to then...
Oh, wait, say that again. I like that. That's sexy. The complexion for the protection.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
For you to then go out of your way to do something like calling police on somebody because you don't believe they belong. For you to do that and to be active in a world that is already stacked against the person you're calling it on is funny to me, because you don't even understand the power of your own position. Here's the thing. At this point, the way oppression works, white people don't have to be actively racist. Like, you don't. Just sit back and enjoy the benefits of your forefathers, because they are still there. We are all still fighting for equality.
So can we get into all of that a little bit? And I want to unpack it a little bit. I want to unpack it a lot in the way that
you do.
It's the way that I do.
The way I do is y'all is stupid for trying to be active in something you don't need to be active in. That's like winning Monopoly and saying, let's go again. What you doing? Right?
So let's roll things back a little bit, because I appreciate what you're saying. Obviously, it's your perspective on things. I am particularly cautious about using the words like stupid or thoughtless.
Because you're a therapist.
Also because to me, stupidity is a convenient excuse. And the other side of that is that as an academician, I am a part of a cadre of highly intelligent people that are also very racist. And so I don't want to ever collude one's intelligence with one's co-opting systems of or colluding with systems of oppression. I really don't think oftentimes intelligence has anything to do with it. So, and in particular around this issue of implicit bias, the underlying theory around implicit bias really kind of flies in the face of the logic that you just presented. So I recognize we've been throwing out the term implicit bias a lot. So first, let's kind of quantify it. Let's articulate it. In my field of counseling psychology, we would say, let's give a construct definition of implicit bias. And we think about these as attitudes or stereotypes that we hold unconsciously. They are mental associations that we have that then influence our perceptions, our behaviors. But because they are unconscious, they are oftentimes acted out involuntarily. So oftentimes our behavior doesn't align with how we think about the rationales for our behavior. And the underlying theory comes from there's two different underlying theories that work together for that, right? So we have unconscious attitudes or stereotypes that we hold, associations that influence our conscious behaviors, our actions, how we choose to move in the world, or decisions we make about others around us in the world in terms of our perceptions. They're out of our conscious awareness. And the two theories that that kind of contribute to this bigger idea of implicit bias is one called dual process theory, and two is this idea around in-group versus out-group thinking. So the dual process theory is something I think everybody can relate to, and there's been a couple different iterations of this kind of theory. There's some social psychologists that have researched and written more extensively about this. One group is Petty and I can't say their last name, Cacioppo. I'm not good with Italian names. I think that's Italian. And then the other set of researchers is Evans and Frankish. And what they talk about in terms of dual process theory is that we all walk around with these unconscious implicit cognitive structures. And we also have these explicit, accessible conscious cognitive structures. So our unconscious or implicit cognitive structures are deep, unconscious ideas, feelings, reactions, beliefs, versus explicit, which are the ones that we can think about. They're our actual thoughts. They are deliberative. They're logical. They usually serve some rationale, and they're conscious. When you say, why did you do that? The words that come out of my mouth typically to explain why I did that refer to these explicit cognitive structures. But the other part about dual process is that there's this idea that there's implicit. There's things that are kind of right on the periphery of our awareness at best. So sometimes people might call them intuition. Some people may call them gut reactions. Some people may call them automatic responses or guesses. And we use these things all day, every day about even little simple things. Right. And I find myself doing this all the time with my little one. So we're downstairs and then she gets up and she goes in the pantry and she says, Mommy, can I, before she even finishes the sentence, I'm cutting her off. No, you cannot, because I'm assuming, based upon previous experiences with her, that she's going in to get a snack. She probably wants some sugar or a hot Takis, as discussed previously on podcast, something I don't want her to have. And then I'm going to say about 2 to 3 times out of 10, she'll say, no, Mommy, I was going to ask, can I take some of these sparkly waters and put them in the refrigerator for you? Can I help? And then I have to go, oh, I didn't slow down and listen, because I was responding to her consciously based on unconscious automatic beliefs and thoughts. So that's a little example of how like dual process theory works. If you've ever made a choice that, oh, you know what, I'm not going to go left, I'm going to go right. Or you say, I better double check to make sure I have my keys before I lock the car, right? Those sorts of things, those little moments that are kind of right outside of your consciousness, we might call them pre-conscious, speak to kind of how intuition or how some of those implicit structures can influence our cognitive or more conscious thoughts. So you take this idea of dual process theory. You still with me, Tomas?
Sure am.
No, I've lost it. Okay, you're still there.
No.
We take this.
I just had to Google, how do you spell that word cadre again? I'm still trying to Google that.
We're now in dual process theory, right? DUAL, dual meaning two, process, dual? How the brain works, process.
Like like do-al, like a do-rag, like do-al?
Like none of those things.
None of them?
Like dual as in two, not as to pull out 2 guns and try to see who shoots each other first. Not
so
a duel.
You saying dual? You ain't saying dual, because I know dual. Dual live downtown. He on 36.
Dual process theory, right?
Like computer processing theories?
I feel like you're just making things more confusing for people.
Really I really am.
Unnecessarily so. So 2 process theory. How about that? We call it dual because they work together, right? Both processes are happening oftentimes at the same time, or at least so quickly that it's hard to distinguish that one precedes the other. So you take that's one part of the big picture of implicit bias. And then you take the other part, which is in-group versus out-group. And this is like old brain stuff. Think about like pre-civilization stuff, where it became really, really important for human beings to be able to decide who is safe and who is not, who's in my group and who is not. And to be able to do that on a level that doesn't require a lot of conscious thought, right? Because our conscious thinking is a heavier workload than all the stuff that happens in unconsciously, right? So if you think about it like this, Are you sitting right now thinking about how many times your eyes have blinked in the past minute?
Yes, all the time.
Then
it preoccupies my thoughts.
We need to get you hooked up to an fMRI immediately. Okay. Do you think about how many times your heart is beating in a minute?
All the time.
I can't with you.
Because that heart is hard working. And I'll be showing it gratitude, just like, thank you for beating without my acknowledgement. I really appreciate it.
Come on now.
Absolutely.
Can you cooperate a little bit with me today? Shoot, cooperate just a little bit.
Maybe I shouldn't have put a secret ingredient in my tea this afternoon. I'm feeling so discordant this afternoon.
First of all, it's not even secret. It's called alcohol.
Well, it ain't now. Thank you.
It ain't secret. You don't think about those things. They Absolutely. But your brain is the one organ that does all of that for you. It is outside of your conscious thought. And so there are other things that relate to our feelings about things, that relate to our capacity for perceiving our environment, all of those sorts of things that also sit outside of our conscious awareness and that serve a function. The problem with this is some of the implicit structures that we have developed, or implicit associations that we have developed in this societal structure, are embedded in systems of oppression. That's where the problem comes in. Okay. So we have this in-group, out-group versus this in-group, out-group idea, in that people that look like me, cool. People who don't look like me, warning, danger, right? And so what research has found is that folks are pretty consistent with being able to identify in very quick response who's in their in-group and who's in their out-group. And there's actually even some research with whites in specific that say they have an even stronger in-group bias than they have for out-groups, more so than folks from other racial groups. And I think that I think how oppression functions also serves that kind of line of thinking as well. Okay, so you take this idea that we want to recognize who's in, who's out, who's good, who's bad, who's safe, who's not. And you want to take this other idea that some of that processing is happening outside of our conscious awareness, but then filters up to actually impact our conscious decisions and behaviors. And voila, you have implicit bias. The problem with our popular conversation and regular discourse about things is that we tend to not use specific terms. And the real specific term should be racial implicit bias, because implicit bias as a concept in and of itself is a fairly neutral concept. It's not, the example that I gave before, right, with my daughter, it's not based in any system of oppression or any system of power. What we've been talking about a lot more in popular conversation and with all of these incidents being highlighted is really, we're talking about negative racial implicit bias. That's the full story. Okay. And what happens is there are negative racial stereotypes that exist about people of color, and the ones for Black people are most salient and most readily available because they are longer standing in this country and how people are socialized. And that those sort of negative racial implicit biases then reflect unconscious negative racial stereotypes about Black folks that show up in white folks' conscious behavior. So it's not a matter of how intelligent or not someone is. What it is a matter of is how aware folks are that there's a possibility that they hold negative racial implicit bias. What matters is their motivation to be aware of whether they hold negative racial implicit bias, and their ability to act in non-racist ways on those particular negative racial implicit biases.
So here's the thing. Let me jump in here for a second.
Jump in.
So let's go back to the comment that I used when I used the term stupid. And I also, as you know, love language.